versus Egypt, the overlooked key fact. As narrated in the both Quran and the Old Testament, Musa confronted a person named Pharaoh. One verse in the Quran cite a statement made by Pharaoh to his people mentioning a key geographical location. The official translation of the verse in question is, as Pharaoh proclaimed among his people, saying, O my people, does not the dominant of Egypt belongs to me? Witness those streams flowing underneath my palace. What see you not then? Am I not better than this Musa, who is a contemptible wretch and can scarcely express himself clearly? In the given context, Western English reader could reasonably conclude that Muslims are in accord with the biblical account of Musa's geographical embellishment, i.e., Egypt. What most Western readers won't realize that, however, is that they are reading a mistranslation of a holy verse, one which doesn't echo what verse actually saying in Arabic. The Arabic version doesn't mention the name Egypt at all. What is mentioned is all over the name is Misr. The correct translation ought to read, O my people, does not the domain of Misr belongs to me? In fact, it is not adequate to translate proper names since they are an expression of a distinctive identity of a person or a place, and therefore should solely be vocally transliterated in the translation, just like the name Musa and Pharaoh as indicated in the above verses. Now, why was the name Misr transformed into Egypt during the translation process? The answer to this particular question will be revealed later. First, let us consider the following scenario. Had the translation mentioned the real name, i.e., Misr, as the homeland of the both Pharaoh and the Musa, then the Western reader would naturally inquire above where the place Misr was. If the answer was, it is a country known by the name of Egypt, the another question will rise, which is why Muslim calling it Misr, and why world all over the world people are calling it Egypt, while the rest of us calling it Egypt. If somebody said probably the country was called Misr during the time of Musa, 1300 BC, then they will raise another question, that Misr by whom and when people were calling it Misr, because the Bible also mentioned the name Misr instead of Egypt. Old Testament Bible. There is no Egyptian record that contribute to this fact. Under Ramses II, the new known pharaohs in the Old Testament, the pharaoh that was people consider was the biblical pharaoh Ramses II. The Egyptian kingdom do not have name Misr in area before and after the 19th dynasty to which Ramses II is assigned to. No contemporary historical record, it not at all.
Do not
No
conclude.
ancient Egyptian contemporary neighborhood civilization ever support the claim that Egypt was called Misr, despite the obvious economical and political relationship between them. If the answer is that it was called Misr after Islam by the Muslim nation, then another set of questions will surface, such as since when has the name been projected on Egypt? And what does this name Misr mean? The the scholar may conclude that theologian also conclude that simply because Muslims are uh, copying from the biblical account, then transferring there translating their material, because the as I said before, because the Old Testament also mentioned it as misr. This circle of confusion contributed in shadowing the Christian and the Muslim world, as well as many Christian community in long-term illusion, which has been challenged to date only by the Egyptologists recently. Here is a catch. The early Muslims do not call it Misr or Egypt. It call it one reason that led Muslim translators to transform the Misr to Egypt. The answer goes back to the fact that the Egypt currently has two formal names. One is recognized by the non-Muslim, and which is Egypt, and other is Misr, which is recognized by the all Muslim or Arabic world, including Egyptian themselves. Most of the Westerners are unaware of the fact that the Egypt had two names. But why should a Muslim assume that whenever Quran is mentioning Misr, it actually means Egypt? Is this long established central assumption accurate, or is it about time that it is subjected to a circle analysis and review? Now, the Quran does mention Joseph, Moses, Exodus, etc., and stated many biblical patriarchs were in Misr. Now, Egyptian calling themselves Misr doesn't hold any. This argument doesn't hold any water, because they weren't calling themselves Misri before the advent of Islam. The official name of Egypt was Kemet, KMT. That was the name that were there given by themselves, and people were calling them Kemet. Now, how do we know? On the Egyptian ancient history mythology, as narrated in Osiris and Isis myths, is that name Coptos and or Copto, which were gradually converted into Gipt, Gept, and then to Al Gipt, Elgibt, Gipt, Al Gipt, and finally Egypt, and it eventually became Egypt, as pronounced by Westerner. Now, do Muslim calling it Misr instead of Al Gibt or Gibt Copt? Because it was majority Coptic when Muslim arrived there. The reason for this mutation, according to Arabic history, and we have to look into the Arabic history, Islamic history, the time of the prophet. In the time of the prophet, Egypt was known among the people of Arabia by the name of Al-Gibt. The Arabian know it was called Al-Gibt, Al-Copt, because it was majority Coptic. There is an incident when the prophet sent his letter to the Egyptian ruler Al-Muqawwas, inviting him to Islam. So we have handwritten manuscript, the letter from the prophet, the letter extract, and the letter mentioned the chief of Gibt, Muqawis, as it referred Muqawis as chief of the ruler of Al-Gibt, Al-Copt. So though it can conclude that Al-Gibt was the official former name of in the time of the prophet. Now here comes the revelation. It is the Septuagint Bible that created this confusion. The Hebrew is actually Arabic Syriac language. It is a Arabic Syriac language. During the exile in the Babylonian exile, the Israeli rabbis produced what they call the Torah, containing the Ten Commandments, in the addition historical account of Israeli tribes. That Syriac Torah might have been the first recognized written holy book produced by the Israeli rabbis. That that a Syriac book In that Syriac book, Jewish book, the Mizraim was the documented name of the place Musa and the Pharaoh lived. This name is consistent with the Holy Quran account indicated and as above mentioned verses the geographical location of Musa and Pharaoh. This Syriac Arabic, the Septuagint, let's call it the Septuagint, is the first Greek translation of this Greek Torah. It was compiled in Egypt, Alexandria, around 282 BC. Only shortly after it was fully under Alexander the Great control. Ptolemy ben Philadelphus, the Greek sovereign, requested that the latest revelation time to be translated in Greek. A team of rabbis, 70 rabbis, produced the translation, and it is reported that within 70 days the Greek Torah was ready for publishing. In the Greek book, a slight alteration was introduced during the transliteration process. Every Arabic Syriac word which read MZAM was translated to the Greek word which reads Egypt, i.e., for example, Mizraim, was translated during the translation process. This indescribable act was all that was needed to create a large-scale, long illusion. Many of you conclude that maybe Muslims are copying from the Septuagint Torah, which is not true. It wasn't available in Arabic. They copy from Christian sources. They would have copied from like Greek or something, but they don't. So the name of Egypt would have been Egypt rather than the Misr, as we know. Here comes the revelation. The word misr or Mizraim is an ancient Semitic word. It describes a cosmopolitan city. Rather, it's not a proper name. It's not a proper name for Egypt. In both the Torah and the Old Testament and in the Bible, it's not a proper name. Actually, the story about the Moses and the Egypt, Misr, and about the Pharaoh is an ancient Semitic folk tale. So the Muslim and the Jewish have same source. The both story coming from the same ancient Semitic folk story. We established before the Muslim or the Arab do not call it Egypt, Misr. As they invaded, they start calling it much later. As we established, the Misr is not a name of a particular place. It actually means a cosmopolitan city. So Muslim even called the Iraq Misr, the Babylon Misr this, Misr that. According to ancient Semitic Arabian folk story, very much like the name Misr or Mizraim, even the name Pharaoh is not actually a proper name. It's mean, so it's not a personal name. The real name of the Pharaoh was Al-Walid bin Musab. He kept a small garrison of guard to protect his luxury. You can read his full story, link in the description. Read it by yourself and check it out. Apart from this crazy blog, most of my information coming from the book called The Egyptian No. The book called The Ancient Egyptian No Pharaoh, No Ancient Israeli. It was written by Dr. Ashraf Izzat. Please do check it out.